Welcome back, David. Another week, another video. This week, I want to focus on something that comes up now and then, predominantly because of how we are still taught about food, nutrition. There is a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misunderstandings, and sometimes uh, we get overwhelmed with what's, where, how. We obviously have different views than majority of people, and we're just going to give an insight of our perception and specifically your knowledge on differences between naturally grown and synthetically generated foods. Maybe you want to open up what's natural anymore, because more often than not, we just see all these greens and whatever grown, and they are just covered with we don't even know what. And there are some places where it's becoming illegal to even grow your own stuff anymore. So it'd be interesting to know what's natural grown food, what's organic food. That's a slippery slope at the moment as well. And then maybe going into what's synthetically generated food, and then how it impacts our health, gut health, mental clarity, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. So number one, naturally grown food, the way that I would describe it, right? And again, without getting very technical, is any food that's grown outside in the environment of where it's going to be consumed, right? So, like, for example, a banana could be naturally grown in Panama or anywhere in the jungle. But if I eat it living in Wyoming, that's not natural to my biology or my local environment. So it's not just that the food was grown outside under natural conditions. It's that the food was grown outside under natural conditions in your local area. And by local, I don't necessarily mean like within a 15-minute drive of you. I mean at that latitude slash elevation, right? The region, right? Like most people are familiar with like regions, which would be states in America or provinces in other countries, whatever the nomenclature would be. And so that's kind of what I would consider a naturally grown food. It's grown in the local environment of where it's going to be consumed. Why is that important? The reason why it's important is because of something called uh, hydrogen, right? Like every atom that's making up food and making up our bodies has hydrogen in it, and a lot of our major processes are involved heavily with hydrogen, like hydrogen pumping in the mitochondria, and then that eventually going through metabolism and turning into cellular water, right? Why is that important? Because there is two different versions of hydrogen on this planet that are involved in this in the food web, right? And that's light hydrogen as um, your has how would I say a heavier molecule in it, which makes it slow down processes, right? So, in other words, it has more mass, so it moves slower through the biological processes in your body. It doesn't mean that you don't have heavy hydrogen in your body. It means that too much of it slows down cellular processes. That's really the one thing that you have to understand is when you consume things that have a lot of deuterium, heavy hydrogen, biological processes slow down. Now, why would that be beneficial? Because there are times of the year, for example, where certain foods that are growing in that local environment are going to naturally have more deuterium, more heavy hydrogen in it. And that's going to happen in high sunlight environments. High sunlight foods have more deuterium in them, more heavy hydrogen. Why would that be beneficial for biology? Because biology gets shifted. In other words, when you have a 16-hour day in the summer, say you live in the Northern Hemisphere, which is going to be most of our audience, right? You live in the UK or the United States. In the summertime, you get 14-hour days, 16-hour days, or even 18-hour days, depending on how high latitude you are. Why would it be beneficial to slow down biology? Because you're going to be active for way, way, way longer than normal. That's the reason why. It's an energy conservation system, right? Whenever you have longer days, longer activity, you want to slow down biology a little bit to conserve energy and so forth. It's purely an adaptive thing to be able to do the things that we do on this planet, which is always, always, always conserving energy, because energy cannot be destroyed or created. It can only be transformed. So biology has figured out a way to be extremely efficient on this planet, and it uses the combination of light hydrogen and heavy hydrogen to ebb and flow depending on the season. So if the and where do we get, so where do we get this heavy hydrogen or light hydrogen? It comes through metabolism, and it comes through the water and food we eat and drink, right? And um, because of the water cycle on the planet, meaning, the seawater will evaporate, get in the clouds, and then it'll go across the globe, and then it gets deposited as snow at higher latitudes, etc. That whole cycle that you learned about in like junior high or high school or whatever, that is a cycle of deuterium depletion for the regions on the planet that are going to require light hydrogen. So in other words, just like I said, in the summer, you tend to accumulate deuterium and slow down metabolism a little bit because the days are longer. The opposite happens in the winter. When the days are shorter, metabolism gets ramped up because the foods that are only available in that environment, say wintertime, are the water that's still flowing. That is not able to be frozen because it has light hydrogen in it, right? So that means that the molecule moves faster and it stays water and not freezing. And the foods that are available are usually only going to be animal sources or plant sources that don't require a lot of sunlight, like mushrooms and things of that nature. Um, I know that's not a plant. I know it's a fungus, but those have less deuterium in it. Why is that valuable to now ramp up metabolism on shorter days? Because you're going to need to survive those shorter, colder days by ramping up your metabolism and producing more heat. You're a mammal. So it ebbs and flows that way. Now, how does this become disrupted, right? I just mentioned that water and food are the main things that kind of shift more deuterium or less deuterium in the body, which will then shift metabolism one way or another to a significant degree. Uh, when you grow food synthetically, you are no longer controlling the deuterium light hydrogen to deuterium ratio. So, in other words, a plant that gets grown under synthetic light will not have as much light hydrogen, and it'll have a lot more deuterium. You're going to slow down metabolism. You might not notice that if you live at the equator, for example. You eat synthetic foods, you may not notice that, especially if you're outside a lot, and that naturally depletes deuterium. Just sunlight in itself depletes deuterium from accumulating too much. So synthetic foods start to lose their ability to auto-regulate how much deuterium is in the plant or in the food that you're going to consume versus not. And this goes even a step further with recent developments with lab-grown meat. Under normal circumstances, right, the animal that you would get your meat from, where are they at? They're outside. They're eating the foods that are outside. You may feed them grains or they might be eating grass or whatever, right? But the point is they're outside. They're experiencing temperature change. They're experiencing light changes. So they are naturally going through deuterium depleting processes. So when you consume that animal's tissues, you're already consuming deuterium depleted energy, right? Because the animal had to go through the metabolism of processing the food for you, right? When you lab grow a meat, that process is not happening. You are subject to whatever molecules they used in the lab to create the meat, and they are not controlling the hydrogen molecule of whether it's light hydrogen or deuterium. Um, that is a problem now. And again, this is not conspiracy theory, right? If you can make something right from scratch, like meat, for example, and I just said that they don't have control of the hydrogen molecule, whether it's light hydrogen or heavy hydrogen. Well, what if they did have control? Now you can slow down metabolism at will on anybody who consumes the food that you want them to consume. You can now start to control metabolic rate of large amounts of people on the planet if they're all getting their food from the same manufacturer, for example. That is a big problem because not everybody lives in a place. Like I said, if you consume synthetic foods, you'd have less detriment in an equatorial environment or in the summertime. But you won't know how to control that yourself if you live somewhere where there's four seasons and or it's wintertime, right? And you're eating synthetic foods, and all of a sudden energy drops big time because your metabolism is running so, and you're consuming synthetic meats and synthetic foods all the time. Unless you are aware of this subject that I just talked about, you won't even know why it's happening, right? So
What
that's
would be
really the
physiological
biggest thing that
effect
I wanted to
on
highlight
somebody's
when it
body?
comes to synthetic. Um, well, but it'll slow down all metabolic rate, and metabolic rate does not just mean like the calories that you can eat. It means all processes in the. It'll slow down cell turnover. It'll slow down the ability to make things like hormones and neurotransmitters. It will slow down just about every process that you can think of. You'll suffer from more brain fog. You'll be more sluggish. When you go get blood work done, you'll get a lot of markers that are showing metabolic rate low, like your thyroid. Um, Basically, all the things that would happen when you live inside of a synthetic environment that we've already highlighted in all of our previous videos. But now what will happen is even if you're living in a good environment, but you're consuming synthetic foods because it's convenient or affordable to you, you're going to suffer the same effects, right? You can't have one without the other, right? Which is kind of what we've highlighted over the course of the years that we've been doing our thing is the environment plays just as big or slightly more of a role than food and activity. On the flip side, if the food you're consuming is completely synthetic, it's as if you're living in a synthetic environment. It'll affect the same systems again.
So, based on this, is there a benefit of having synthetic food at all, ever, anywhere?
Only if you can control so yes, here's a synthetic food, deuterium depleted water. That's a real thing. That is a synthetically manufactured water. It is depleted of deuterium, so it has a large amount of light hydrogen. That would be beneficial to biology. Not necessarily like blanket statement, right? Blanket statement, just always drink deuterium depleted water. But would it help certain outcomes and be helpful for health? Yes. Um, if you know how to use it and you know what you're looking for, deuterium depleted water is a synthetic food, synthetic water, not made synthetically, but changed synthetically, right? They go in and they remove the heavy hydrogen on purpose, right? If you start doing that to food, for example, lab grown meat, for example, if they make the meat from hydrogen molecules that are deuterium depleted or light hydrogen, they would start to have the same positive effects as deuterium depleted water. But now you're hoping that the manufacturer knows these things. You don't know that for sure, and you would have to audit them, by batch, right? Because they don't just grow like it does in nature, right? Where it's just continually doing its thing. They would have to retool their equipment. They would have to retool that and test each batch to make sure that it's not being contaminated, or that the specs of the meat are, or the specs of the food are to the specs that they're saying and selling to you, like food labels essentially, right? Food labels are allowed to be up to 20% off, right? So that's the type of rabbit hole you start to go down when you are eating synthetic foods.
What about nutrient density and bioavailability of nutrients in those foods? Because if you have something synthetic, you're probably only looking at protein, carbs, and you're looking predominantly on macronutrients rather than micronutrients. And some companies might opt for cheaper micronutrients just to hit the label. Hey, you're going to have so many vitamin C and so much of this and so much of that. So what do we know? Do we know actually how it affects our body? Because predominantly, when you look on real life experience, it's specific to like bodybuilding style kind of approach. People who are focusing on still eating, so to speak, real food. They do look better, they do perform better, they kind of have better health outcomes, and so on and so forth. You still cannot substitute that with any amount of powders or synthetic vitamins or anything like that. We just don't see that yet. Maybe in future they will figure out like, hey, if you take this drink or that powder, you're going to be healthier than if you're eating steak. We're not there yet. So what do we know about what kind of advancements can be made to improve this and actually make synthetic food better? Let's say for the sake of future, hey, we want to go to Mars. We can't take a bloody cow on a ship, can we?
No. In my honest opinion, you're not going to be able to replicate what happens with the sun in terms of the phytonutrients that are coming in foods. Now, I'm specifically talking about plant foods, right? Basically everything that's not meat, right? The lab grown meat thing, that's going to be a complete failure. It's just not really, you're not going to be able to replicate the metabolism of an animal that will put it into a meat completely, right? I think that's
Interesting.
something that we don't possess the technology to do that for a long time, right? I know that the concept is true and it is possible to do it right now, but as far as like even making it remotely close to an actual animal product, it's not going to come close. Phytonutrients in the plants, right? Plants like anything synthetic, vegan burgers and all of that type of stuff, soy, all of that, right? You can grow it synthetically and all of that. We know this, right? So we actually know this already. Um, like Walmart and well, basically any grocery chain, you can go to the produce aisle and you can see the normal stuff that they're going to sell you. And then they have this other little section here that's called organically grown or farm raised or whatever. And the price difference, but the thing is the food chain, the grocery store has to pay more for those items, just like you do. They don't do it just blatantly. They don't just say, oh, okay, Farmer Joe says this is organically grown, so we're going to pay him more. They verify it. How do they verify it? They verify it with what's something called an optical scanner that scans biophotons. We know for a fact with science, with the scanner, that organically grown, true organically grown food grown outside produces more biophotons. Those are associated with phytonutrients and everything that the metabolic processes of that plant produces. And it's giving off low frequency UV light, which are called biophotons. And you can scan these with an optical scanner. Grocery chains already do this. That's how they verify that Farmer Joe did indeed grow this food organically. And when you go and test or scan a food that is not grown organically, it produces significantly less biophotons. Now, the science has been kind of squashed with what do these do within the body. So nobody, everybody says, well, we don't really know what it does, but we know that there's more in this and less in that, right? But I'm telling you right now, you and I and every single living being on this planet are based on electricity and light. Our communication system within our cells is based on electrical conductivity and light frequencies. So if you're consuming foods that produce less biophotons, that's going to send less proper signaling at the lumen level, at the gut level, which is then going to send less information to the brain because of the brain gut axis, which is then going to send less information to the circadian signaling or all the clock genes at the rest of the body. So essentially, you end up underperforming on your metabolic processes when you only consume low biophoton foods or AKA synthetically grown foods. I I know to me and you that makes a lot of sense, but for people that don't really understand this, you have to kind of go to like our gut series that we made with the brain gut axis and how the brain and the gut are communicating through light and the microbes in your gut are using the food coming in to produce certain frequencies of light, to produce certain neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. Those are all produced in the gut first through metabolism of consuming food. And then those signals are then sending light to the gut, and then the gut is innervated through the vagus nerve to send that signal to the brain, and vice versa. The brain can send the signal to the gut to prepare it to digest high sunlight foods or low sunlight foods. If you listen to our video on calories. So that is how this is all intertwined. When you start consuming synthetically grown foods, all of that information is less information. And what Einstein and has brought forth in terms of E equals MC squared is, and a whole bunch of other math like physics and stuff like that, is that energy and information are one. Energy and information are always yoked. And the moment you get rid of information, you by default get rid of energy. So, what did I just say in terms of if you consume food that is giving your body less information, it's by default also giving it less energy because your body will not be able to extract all of the energy appropriately because it's not just about decaying the food in the gut. It's about what did this food give us in terms of information, which then flips certain switches at the rest of the biology that optimizes it to use the energy that you've digested.
It's as if you're tapping into what we see often in sports, where people consume animal products and their hormones get affected. Like Tyson Fury, he got banned by using nandrolone, and he was saying that, oh, I just ate wild boar, or I don't remember what kind of lies he was saying. And then a lot of Mexican boxers are flagged up for using clenbuterol, and they just said, oh, I just ate steak. So can we have something of that sort from synthetically made foods that it's also turned not into just macronutrient, but almost medication? Which we hear now that might be the case, that we already consume that type of meat without us knowing, because there is no regulation of actually forbidding that. So can these different types of foods have different types of effects on our hormonal health? And if that, can we use one or the other in advantage rather than harming ourselves?
So specifically to the examples that you said, I don't think that's possible because the hormones and the way that they tested them in the people would mean that the hormone was active in its active metabolic state. If you consume any animal product that has, for example, clenbuterol in it or nandrolone in it, you would be consuming the metabolites of clenbuterol and nandrolone. So in that particular example, they're just flat out lying and they're trying to cover up drug use in sport. Now, to the actual question that you asked, can consuming foods affect your hormones negatively or positively, whether they're synthetic or whole foods? And the answer is 100%. Because let's just go to meats, for example, right? What happens if these synthetic meats, they start making the fats that are in this meat from animal or sorry, plant source fats? So in other words, hey, we're going to make a really healthy meat. It's going to have no saturated fat in it. It's going to not have actual cholesterol in it. It's going to have mono fatty acids or polyfatty acids in it, and no saturated fats in it. That will definitely come with, hey, I eat this synthetic state versus this organically produced state. You're now going to make more hormones for sure from the cholesterol heavy, naturally grown steak than the synthetic. And that's just by default using different molecules, right? They technically have the same fat content. They could make them identical in terms of macronutrients, but the version of fat that they put in the synthetically one will and probably will be completely different. And if they go by health guidelines, it probably won't have any cholesterol in it. And what do we know about cholesterol? It's the backbone to every single sex hormone the body makes. And not only that, but also cortisol, which is our stress handling capability hormone. So this is right now conspiracy theory because This is not actively going on everywhere, but that doesn't mean that it won't. And that's the following. If you were to somehow get a whole population to eat synthetic only, including the meats, you now have control of not only their hormonal profile, but their stress handling capability. You can essentially ensure exactly when they're going to die, meaning it's not beneficial for the government to support people that go into their 50s and 60s and are now retirement age and are not working and are not contributing to society, but now they are entitled to the benefits that they, signed up for being part of that particular nation state. Well, what if they never make it to 50 or 60? Well, then they contributed through their contributing years and now they're gone. You can manufacture people that only live a certain age when you start controlling exactly everything that they eat. Right. And then we have the concept of mRNA technology now invading synthetically grown meat or not even synthetically grown meat, but animal sources that are still grown outside, but are now injected with mRNA technology, which we know now it does get into the DNA of the animal and it does affect future generations. This is brand new information that Kevin McKernan has put out. I actually made a post on this on my Instagram last night where he is actually saying we know this without a doubt. We've done the studies. It's been replicated in Canada. It's been replicated in UK. We know that mRNA technology can survive metabolism and infect and replicate inside of mammalian cells. We know that for a fact now. The mRNA technology will do that type of thing. And that starts to open the door with what I just mentioned before. You can start to control lifespan of individuals or whole group populations. That is
So knowing
something
that,
that,
is there something we can do to kind of clarify, verify the quality of animal products we consume now? Or is there not?
yes, well, like, yeah, if you have the money and money's not really like you don't need an absurd amount of money, but yeah, you can go out of your way and do exactly what food chains are already doing, which is, hey, you now scan your own food and make sure that the food that you are consuming is of high quality organic origin with an optical scanner. Now, they're not cheap, right? I'm not saying this is, $100 device. This is, a couple $1,000 device, but if you're living in an area where this is actively going on, for example, that's a very, very good investment because now you can verify before you consume the foods that you're eating to make sure that they are not contaminated. And then more in terms of what's alarming right this moment with the mRNA technology is if you follow Kevin McKernan's work, he actually uh, has a kind of like a do-it-yourself way to genetically test this type of stuff with the amount of money that it costs you to test food to see if it's laden with mRNA technology is only like a couple $1,000s these days. It's not hundreds of thousands like it used to be 10 years ago. He goes, this type of technology is cheap for the verification that it's doing. He goes, I can, without a doubt, show a high schooler how to do this properly with, a couple $1,000s worth of equipment. Um, so yes, there is a way to verify this. It's not going to be a testing of yourself or anything like that. It's going to be a testing of your actual food. Now, if you grow your own food, you kind of circumvent that whole process right now, which is the whole concept of decentralization that we've talked about with Bitcoin and finances. And now you have to kind of start doing that with your health. Part of the decentralization of your health is decentralizing where your food comes from. What does that mean? That means you no longer buy your chicken from Tyson Foods. You buy your chicken from, the local farmer in your region, right? Or farmers more would be more likely. That sort of stuff, right? Decentralizing means you don't buy it from a centralized entity because a centralized entity could go through and vaccinate the whole batch of chickens or the whole batch of cattle or the whole batch of eggs or whatever food, right? They have control of a lump sum and they can add or take away whatever they want from that, and now they can affect a large population. That's called centralization. When you decentralize what you're eating, basically all that means is you go down to your local butcher, or you go down to your local farmer or a farmer's market, and you get involved with those people because they are growing things locally, and they will be able to tell you exactly when this was grown and where it came from and all of that type of stuff. And it's as simple as just having a conversation with somebody. It's not difficult, and it doesn't cost you money. And you buy the food from those types of people. That type of service is going to become incredibly valuable in the future uh, for future generations. That type of service of locally grown foods. And again, it doesn't mean right in your town. It means in that local environment regionally.
So when we talk about future, what could we expect? What's kind of happening for the future of foods? We know there is a lot of big push for synthetic this, synthetic that, and all those kind of things. And what would be more kind of, if we would go that way, what could be the way to make it healthier rather than we just gonna make all synthetic foods and not care how it affects your body and this and that, not test and all those kind of things. If you
I'm
were
glad you said
to
that, right?
be in charge, what would be your choice to create a human being that is healthy for as long as possible? That would be my.
Yeah. So the same effort that we're putting into making synthetic environments to grow foods, we should put that effort into making the environment, the outside environment, not polluted in terms of there needs to be, let's just say, like you said, what would I do, right? What would I do? And this is what it would be, right? There would be a section, kind of like a national forest, where there isn't any human interference, and that's where your food is grown, right? And you develop technologies that exploit that environment to the best of its ability. So, for example, if it's a northern latitude environment, that means there's going to be natural deuterium depletion there. Well, that means you're going to want to grow more of your food in that area in terms of plant foods. And then in regions where there isn't such a deuterium depleting effect, like more sunlight high regions, that's where you would want to grow most of your animal products, right? So you start to split the region into places of, hey, this place gets a little bit colder, it's a little bit more higher altitude. We grow more uh, plant foods there because they're going to take advantage of having a deuterium depleted water source and higher UV index because of altitude. And then in places where it's more hot and more so essentially, you start to take the concepts that I've laid out with how the environment affects and shapes organisms, and you start exploiting it. You lean into what the planet already does, and then now you can distribute those foods to large populations of large amounts of people, and that in turn will result in healthier human beings. We were on that track before the Industrial Revolution, right? We were expanding life expectancy at dramatic rates because of everybody kind of grew their own food and interacted with each other in that format, and it just kind of got chopped off, right? It never grew to its full volition of, hey, how can we make milk and eggs even better for us, right? Instead of just locally on the farm, and then it goes, oh, well, we can move the cows from one place to another for deuterium depletion processes. We can grow foods in a certain region at certain times of the year more effectively because of high sunlight yield, and then we can transport and do all of the refining of those foods in a different area, depending on water cycles and things of that nature. Like that science of how that all went down or could have gone down kind of got cut off. That needs to be picked back up, right? So essentially, putting more science in knowing exactly what the planet already does with sunlight and water, and then exploiting it for our food chains.
Hmm. To summarize it all, it feels like there is still more for naturally grown foods than for synthetic grown foods, even though it might sound extremely beneficial to just learn how to create food in a lab more time efficient, more this, more that, and you might even resolve the famine and the global shortage of food and whatnot. But it just feels like it might backfire in a sense that it can negatively affect your well-being, not just physically, but mentally as well, because how you explain there might be disruptions in hormonal balance, even simple thing as longevity. Like you think you're just consuming nutrients, but we know it's not as simple. Even when we are suggesting somebody supplements when they need to take, we suggest specific supplement from a specific company that we would trust instead of just buy this ZMA. It's just not how it works. So
Mhm.
future
Yeah,
direction.
and I want to add one thing, right? You mentioned something about efficiency and like, being able to grow more crops and more yield, and that's the big push for synthetic and all of that. You can do that with natural circumstances. So here's an example. Here's a for example of like, hey, if we lean into these types of technologies more, we could make things more efficient and higher yield and faster. In Japan, they already do this type of stuff with cherries, with cherry trees. They go in and they plant them early in the season, like way early, when the snow is still on the ground. And what they do is they plant them in a way where they have tunnels underground where they actually burn wood and heat the ground before the ground can even get hot from natural circumstances, but they're heating it naturally with infrared light, essentially wood. And they heat all of the ground and all of the crop, and that brings them 2 months early to season. They actually grow a full two crops in the same season that would have happened only one or two. They get 4 or 5 crops just by exploiting temperature change, thermal energy in the ground. There's nothing synthetic about that other than synthetically manipulating the environment, right? That's what I'm saying. The environment is where the focus and the syntheticness needs to start being implemented on to grow the food naturally. But there's nothing different about the cherries there other than they're being exploited with ground temperature early in the season, right? That's what I'm talking about, leaning more into these types of technologies. And in that particular case, yields twice as much food, still naturally grown, still organic.
Yeah, so essentially we're not consuming something completely unnatural, but we consume same stuff by just manipulating the environment it's been grown, but it's still the same exact environment, same exact circumstances, same exact process that would have happened naturally without any interference. And we know exactly what we are having and how it's going to affect us because our body has consumed it for thousands of years already.
Correct. Correct. That's what the future should be.
Yeah, I think this is another rabbit hole. We could probably spend hours and hours and hours. But I know I'm mindful of your time, so I'm gonna let you off for this week. And if we have some follow-up questions, we're gonna probably dig deeper in this in some future videos as well.
Thank you.